What's going on in the news, Jonathan?
Well, Sean, we've got a couple of gaming pieces of news to talk about and a little bit of animation news. Let's kick it off with the thing that has set the internet afire over the last month, which is Sony's announcement of the PS5 Pro, our first new console announcement in a while. The PlayStation 5 Pro will be launching this November for a MSRP of $700 in the US, although if you're comparing it apples to apples...
It's $699.99. Come on, that 1 cent's so important.
But if you are comparing it apples to apples to the base PS5 they would be replacing, it is more in the range of $810 because it does not include a stand or a disc drive, which are $80 and $30 separately. So if you really wanted to replace your PS5, if you have discs, if you want to use it as a media player, it is a $800 system. And if you live anywhere but the US, it is much, much closer to $1,000. Or if you're in Japan, way the fuck over $1,000.
Yeah.
So it is breaking new ground on console pricing. Whether it is breaking new ground elsewhere is the debate that people have been having. But Sean, you told me before we started recording, you're one of the people who's ordered one of these things.
Yes, I pre-ordered one. So, obviously, there is the sticker shock of the price. I mean, I'm not getting a stand. I'm probably not going to get a disc drive either because I haven't. The last disc game I played in my PlayStation was when I imported Tsukihime. And then before that was when I got a very cheap copy of Sonic Frontiers. So it's like I've kind of played one disc game on my PS5 maybe since it's launched, a year. And so I kind of realized, I probably don't really need the disc drive because the thing I use my disc drive for my PS5 is just to play Blu-rays, and I've got a Blu-ray player I can just use instead. But the big reason why I'm getting it is I needed to get a PS5 anyways, because kind of how the consoles work in my household is I get the newest thing, and then I give the previous thing to my dad. And so that's why I got a PS4 Pro originally when that came out. Was I wasn't initially in really the market for one, but my dad had been playing on our original launch Xbox One forever. And I was like, I got to get him off that thing because one, it's silly because why am I or he buying Xbox One games so that he can play some Xbox One games when I already own some of those games on PlayStation? This is just like, eventually this is just costing us money in a weird way, where if he owned a PlayStation, we can just share those games digitally. So then I eventually I was like, well, I'll get that fucking PS4 Pro. I had recently gotten a new TV that was a 4K TV, and so I bought that PS4 Pro, which was the cool Spider-Man one, and gave him my old PS4, and that worked really, really well. And then when the PS5 came out, I got the PS5. I'm like, well, I'm not using this PS4 Pro anymore. So here you go, Dad. You can have my PS4 Pro and just pass that down the line and your PS4 games run a little bit better. He's been on that PS4 Pro now for like 4 years. And we have had this very, very long cross-gen period, but that cross-gen period is more or less done now. Like he kind of can't play most new games. He's been playing Diablo 4 for a year and a half. So I'm like, I got to get him a new game. And so I knew that the PS5 Pro was on the horizon. I was like, I'll just do the same thing. It makes sense. I use my PS5 every day. Might as well upgrade when it comes out. I definitely was taken aback by the price initially. Like it is priced exactly at my threshold, I think. With the $700 thing. And I was initially like, was really hesitant, and I didn't pre-order it right away because I was like, kind of like, that's right on the edge of what I considered like sort of felt appropriate, in terms of price. And it was the disc drive thing that kind of made me like not want to buy it. But then when I really thought about it, I was like, I don't use that disc drive for anything other than watching movies. And if I give my dad my PS5, I'll just take the 4K Blu-ray player that he uses on that TV and just move it to my TV. And so then it kind of like, it made sense. And then once we got better coverage of the console, with Digital Foundry has gotten some like on hands, like actual first person usage of it and their own footage capture and stuff. They've done some analysis. And the PS5 Pro, it is very expensive, but it does the thing based on what I've seen that like I wanted to do. We've talked before on the podcast how it's been frustrating in this generation of consoles that we have some of these games, particularly a lot of games that run on UE5, or any of these kind of AAA games that are trying to push the boundaries of like realistic graphics rendering, that you end up in this weird spot where either you can have the game look like absolute dog shit, just like horrible image quality, where it's running at a really pathetically low internal resolution, upscaled horrendously by FSR2, which is a software-based AI upscaling solution from AMD that just is not designed to upscale like a 720p internal resolution up to something like 1440p. And you get these just like very, very ugly looking games when that happens, when you're playing at those kinds of resolutions. Or you can do I'm going to play it at 30 frames per second and have the image quality be nicer. But even then, some of the image quality stuff in some games like a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth still doesn't look good. Particularly even in the 30 frames per second mode. And there have just been enough games like Alan Wake 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the biggest one, that game just has problems regardless.
Well, this was going to be my question, because the only game I've played on the PS5 where I felt that pinch that hard was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is a game I fucking hate, so I don't care anyway. But I guess, because like there's no first-party game where I've experienced this even a little bit. There's some third-party games that I'm not convinced they're going to make use of it in future. We can talk about that later. But, like, so what are the other ones that you've played that you feel like really need this?
It's Alan Wake 2, Jedi Survivor, and Resident Evil 4 Remake. Those are the three games where I think the image quality is a problem. Particularly
I thought Resident Evil 4... I never had a problem with Resident Evil 4.
Like, if you tweak some of the settings, it got better. I still think that game, it has that FSR2... upscaling problem with like moving things, creating really like weird image breakup and ghosting. And I think it is like, it's a thing where there's something about the way that works and the way that kind of upscaling solution works. It really bothers me. It really stands out a lot when I play games that have that, which is why I've opted to play some of those games like Alan Wake 2 at 30 frames per second, because it's like, I just can't really look at them at 60 FPS when the resolutions are so low. Like, I watched the DF video covering that Star Wars Outlaws game, and that was one where, like, looking at that game in its performance mode, and it was on a YouTube video, so that, like, compounds this to a certain extent. But it, like, the way that the, like, grass looked when you have all this, like, high-detail grass that's moving constantly in the wind, like, it almost made me feel vaguely nauseous, because there's something about, like, not having a, like... There's no, like, kind of fixed point for your eyes to focus on. And so that, like, image breakup and the way that everything swims, it really bugs me. And, there's something about that I really, really do not like the way that looks. And it's kind of started to affect the way, like, I kind of think about what games I want to buy or play. Or then, obviously, like, I will choose to play it at 30 frames per second when I'd rather do it at 60. So the whole pitch of the PS5 Pro, this is what we knew from the pre-release information. It's proved out seemingly based on... reactions from people like Digital Foundry that have got hands-on with it, is that the fundamental pitch is you can play with the kind of quality mode graphics or like really kind of better image quality than the quality mode graphics using PSSR, which is their hardware-based AI upscaling solution, which is more like NVIDIA's DLSS or something like that in the PC space. But you can also play it at 60 frames per second. And that's the general pitch. It's like you get like equivalent or better image quality of what was the 30 FPS mode and do it at the higher frame rate. And that's all I really want. So if it can do that in most games, like that will basically make me happy. And then again, like I need to buy one anyways. If I was not in the market for another PS5, I wouldn't buy it. Because it's fundamentally, it's like a $200 upgrade, because I would end up buying either a $500 or $450 PS5 for my dad regardless. Right. So for me, that a lot of the sort of the punch of that price is eaten up by the fact that I would be buying a new console regardless.
But this is where I find it interesting, Sean, because you're a perfect storm for this.
Yes.
Because you're the exact kind of gamer who notices this stuff and like cares about it. And even just on this podcast, I'm not that person anymore. Mm-hmm. Like maybe I was at one point. I don't care about that anymore. You do. So you're in the market for that. So like the pitch of the console interests you. It doesn't interest me. And that's fine. Not interesting me isn't the issue. But you have that. You were planning on getting another PS5 anyway. So it's not, as you say, just a full $700 investment. And you own a standalone 4K Blu-ray player that you can use to replace the disc drive, so you don't need that, right?
Yes.
But I feel like that's a pretty unique set of circumstances where I think because I think it is fair to say that the general response to this thing has been bafflement by most corners of the internet. And even, Digital Foundry, I think they have been like enthused about what it is technically, but also pretty baffled about the positioning within the market and the pricing and the disk drive and all of that. They were pretty down on particularly the disk drive removal and all of that stuff. Because if you are someone who cares about this stuff the same way you do, Sean, but has a large library of disc games, then you have to buy the disc drive.
Yes.
If you don't have a standalone 4K Blu-ray player and you watch 4K Blu-rays, you got to buy the disc drive. If you live outside of the United States and you are paying in euros or pounds or yen or whatever, it's just way more money. So like, I think that's the thing, is that like what it is offering is absolutely real. The people who are on Twitter saying there's absolutely no difference between the PS5 and Pro are wrong. There is a meaningful, like, there's a thing there that is happening. Was it the smartest decision for Mark Cerny to go out and show it off with The Last of Us Part 2, a PS4 game from 5 years ago that, like, you know, blah, blah, blah? No, absolutely fucking not. That is part of why it got made fun of, and that was a stupid way to introduce it. But, like, so there is a meaningful thing going on there. I think the question is, like, even if you expect it to be niche, and, you know, the PS4 Pro was niche to an extent, although 1 in 5 PS4s were a PS4 Pro, that's not that niche. That's a pretty big market base.
Well, like, it's 1 in 5 if you count, because I think it was more like if you look at the whole base of like the entire PS4's lifetime, then it's more like 10%. It's only 20% if you only look at the PS4 is sold from the point where the PS4 Pro is on the market. Which makes sense. Which kind of makes sense. But it is like the PS4 Pro, I think it was ultimately a more niche console than people, I think, thought of it at the time. Because it was more that like somewhere between 10 to 20% of the market by the end of the PS4's lifetime, depending on how you define that. Well, then that actually
makes my point even more, because that means the PS4 Pro was that niche, even though, I think people forget this, it came in at the exact price that the PS4 was at launch, and it replaced it. So what it was sort of like the mid-gen refresh where the base PS4 got cheaper. So if you hadn't upgraded to the PS4, but you wanted it at a lower price point, you could get that. And if you wanted the nicer PS4, you could do that. And if you were buying it new, it was pretty easy to recommend to someone, just get the PS4 Pro because it's the same price. The PS5 Pro is a very different circumstance, and the PS5 has not gone down in price. In many parts of the world, it has gone up in price. So I'm just like, it's going to be a different level of niche than even the PS4 Pro was. And I guess one question I have in terms of longevity is, outside of Sony, how well supported will it be if such a... Like, again, not only were you able to buy it a couple of days after it went on pre-order sale, you can still go pre-order it from PS Direct. It has not sold out, and that's really shocking for a new anything that goes up in this day and age. The PS Portal sold out in like an hour on PS Direct. All their 30th anniversary stuff sold out right away. This kind of stuff is usually built to sell out, and it's not.
Oh, I know the PS4 Pro was easily available for its entire lifetime. Like, I don't think... Like, this is not like a Portal, or certainly not the 30th anniversary stuff, which that was the thing that was annoying, that like destroyed their whole like store interface, because that's the sort of like designed scarcity, because they only made like 30,000 of the consoles or whatever of those. But yeah, like, you know, like I think it will for sure be a niche device, but I do also think it's delivering a much more meaningful upgrade than the PS4 Pro did relative to the PS4. Like, the PS5 Pro jump will be more substantial. And so I do think that there is a group of people who are going to be interested in that. And it's going to become more apparent when, like I feel like the sentiment in the more hardcore community has shifted, kind of like mine did, once Digital Foundry got their hands on it. Because that announcement was terrible, because for multiple reasons. The positioning of the games was poor. It should have been a longer thing anyways, and given Mark Cerny more time to like actually kind of talk more about the technology and show clearer examples of it. But also the biggest problem is, if you have a bad 1080p YouTube stream, you can't see the difference on that.
Right.
This is like, it's like trying to show off a 4K Blu-ray player by showing someone a DVD. Like, it just doesn't make, like, images of like DVD quality. Like, it just doesn't make sense. The thing you're buying it for is like high quality resolution and detail in the image. That's not going to show in YouTube anyways. Unless you do the kinds of things that Digital Foundry does, where you slow footage down, you zoom in, right? You sort of like try to do things in how you present the information to make the detail clear, regardless of what the compression algorithm is doing. So that way you can see the differences. And, you know, that video presentation did not do that. But if you watch the breakdowns that Digital Foundry have done like Oliver McKinsey got to go hands-on with like a whole host of like games that did different upgrades. It was like 20 games or something like that. Like all of them had really nice, clear upgrades and seemed fairly easy to implement. And you can see it very easily there. So I do think that like it's going to end up being more niche than the PS4 Pro, but I also just think it's like a better device than the PS4 Pro was. As someone who owned the Pro console, like it was nice for getting that little resolution bump. It looked better on a 4K TV, but it didn't feel particularly like it didn't help it didn't run a 30 frames per second game at 60 frames per second, or didn't make a 60 frames per second game look meaningfully 4K. Like it just never really kind of did that. It didn't have that kind of upgrade. And that seems to be what the PS5 Pro is more capable of doing. So it's like it is extremely expensive, but it does give like a more meaningful upgrade. So that's the kind of stuff I'm excited for. And I do think like the nature of what that upgrade is, which is primarily PSSR, makes it easier to implement. Like that seems to be the sentiment I'm seeing. So I think the bare minimum of what you're going to see from games on the PS5 Pro is the regular version will have some sort of like FSR2 upscaling. If it's this kind of game that's pushing that, if it's UE5 or whatever. And then the PS5 Pro version will just replace that upscaling method with PSSR. And honestly, if that's all it does, that's a fucking meaningful enough upgrade for me, because that fixes that problem.
I'm just very much in the camp of like, I get all that. I totally understand. I can, again, the difference I'm not someone out there saying there is no possible difference. That's inaccurate, obviously. It's just, I do look at it and go, oh my, I mean, part of it is there's an economic reality to this too. I make a lot less money than you. I'm not saying you, Sean, are like the monopoly man over here twisting your mustache and your monocle or anything. But it's just a basic, I've been on a, graduate student salary for several years. At the moment, I'm on no salary because I'm in between jobs. So I wouldn't be able to buy this no matter what. Uh-huh. But it is like, even if I were interested in it, that sticker shock is real. I don't want to take it, and especially for people who are overseas. I mean, it's insane, and it's ripping a lid off something that I think there's a bigger discussion of, like, is this a harbinger of things to come for the PS6? Is this the kind of price point they're eyeing for that? Is the hope that like this tech gets cheap enough that the PS6 could be more in the 500 range? I don't know, and I've in listening to different expert discussions on this, like the Digital Foundry people, it sounds like one of the fears at this point is that the components have just gotten so expensive, and the price differentials needed to get meaningful improvements at this point are so high that the future of this like model of console gaming we've been on for a while, I think, is in pretty serious doubt economically, because once you're pricing a console at $700, $800, $1,000, you're pricing out a lot of the market that would buy consoles. Like, you're pricing out a majority of the market that would buy consoles.
Yeah, I mean, because we are just in this position where the last consoles that had an actual price drop was the base PS4 and the base Xbox One. There has not been a console released since then that reduced in price. The PS4 Pro never reduced in price. The Xbox One X never reduced in price. The Switch has never reduced in price. I mean, they did the Switch Lite, which is sort of like a price drop, but in the sense that they've made a cheaper version of the console.
They did sell the base Switch, I think, did go down around the time of the OLED for a while, and it's been on different sales. But the base Switch also has gone in and out of stock in different ways, so it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well, it's like the MSRP.
The Switch has like an asterisk next to it, but your overall point is correct. I'm just saying, if anyone wanted to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because there are temporary sales, like there are times where you could have gotten an Xbox Series S for like dirt cheap. But the console was fundamentally still a $300 console, because when the price regularized back to its MSRP, it went to $300, right? Like that was one of the things with the Switch OLED that was very surprising to me at the time, was that it was $350 rather than, I think what everyone expected to happen was the Switch reducing in price and then the Switch OLED filling that $300 price point. But the Switch OLED is still $350. So like one of the things that this, like, I think you're right, like this raises a question of like what happens with these consoles in the future, because that's not happening necessarily just because like, oh, the companies are greedy. There is like a material reality that is pushing the inability to reduce the price of these consoles because they're not getting meaningfully cheaper to manufacture. And there are lots of technical reasons that we are not experts on that explain that, but everybody that I've ever seen who is like an expert or is well read in that field, there are reasons why it is becoming like physically impossible to just keep on shrinking these things down and making it cheaper and cheaper as time goes on. Like we're hitting kind of like boundaries where that is no longer the reality, where you can't just do 2 years later, the PS2 is worth half the amount of money or costs half the amount of money to manufacture as it did when it originally launched. Like that's just not the world we live in with what like modern manufacturing is and these kinds of components. So it raises questions for absolutely like the PS6. What will that price point be at? I'm very curious for Nintendo. Like, where is the Switch 2? You know, like, I assume it will be like $400 at the floor because the Switch OLED is still $350. Like, are you going to sell a Switch 2 for the same price you can sell a Switch 1? It's like...
$400 for the Switch 2 feels like that would work and that would be fine.
Yes.
But there's the fear that it could be like $500, and I don't know what a Nintendo console that costs $500 does in the market. That feels like a very weird experiment.
Yeah, and so I'm just very curious to see that. Like, that's going to be a very interesting thing to see, one, what they price it at, and then two, to eventually get the sense of, like, are they making money on those? Are they selling at a cost, which we know Nintendo typically does not like to do? I think it's very clear that Sony is not selling the PS5 Pro at a cost, and that makes sense. I think they should have fucking eaten that disk drive thing. The disk drive thing is fucking stupid. That's the stupidest thing about the PS5 Pro, without a doubt, is that it does not come with the disk drive. It should just come with a disk drive. Especially
silly. Because I know while you're fine with it, I think the average person the PS5 Pro is aimed at likes physical media, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think the average gamer who notices these things likes the freedom of being able to bring in their old discs, buy discs, trade discs, or just watch Blu-rays and stuff. Like, if you care about how your game looks, you probably also like Blu-rays and 4K Blu-rays.
Yes. Well, I mean, the reason why I don't buy physical games is because I like Blu-rays now. So, like, I don't like the hassle of having to switch. If I'm watching Sailor Moon for weeks on end, which I have been doing for a while now, I don't want to keep on swapping out those discs all the time for whatever game I'm playing. That just became a hassle. So I'm like, oh, why not? I just buy digitally. You know, like a physical game is nice for like certain kind of economic reasons and in terms of the kind of preservation stuff, but it's not a better version of the game in the way the Blu-ray is a better version of the movie than streaming. So I kind of prioritize Blu-rays there. But yeah, absolutely. Like the Blu-ray thing is extremely silly. It's the dumbest thing about the PS5 Pro. But that aside, like, I think my original point was going to be that Sony is not going to sell it at a cost, which makes sense because it is a niche device. Like, you don't want to sort of take a bath on the PS5 Pro when you're not expecting to sell it to 30 million people. You know, you're going to maybe sell like 10, 12 million of these things maybe. And that's fine. And you're making money on it, so whatever. But yeah, so it's the PS5 Pro. It's an interesting announcement. And again, like it was at the threshold for me, even with all my circumstances. And I do not think it's going to be like a massive hit. It will probably be more niche than the PS4 Pro. But I don't think that that's going to jeopardize like the upgrades you will get for the PS5 Pro, because it seems like the bare minimum upgrade is going to be very simple to implement and will do the thing that I want it to do. And obviously, if there are games that are targeting maybe more advanced ray tracing on the PC, and you can get some amount of that in, because that's part of like the PS5 Pro upgrade as well, is that the GPU can do more ray tracing stuff. Like I'm sure some games will do that. Other games will just say, fuck it, just do PSSR, and that's all you have to do. And I'm fine if that's what they do. I think I'll be satisfied with my purchase. But you are right, Jonathan, that like one of the things that makes it relatively easy for me to buy the PS5 Pro is I am just at the point where my job as a public school teacher, it takes so much time of my life I don't buy lots of things. I'm a fairly like frugal person, so I save lots of my money. I'm just very much in the position where I've got more money to spend on playing games than I have time to play the games that I buy. So it's okay for me to like spend money to make the time I do play those games feel more enjoyable. That is like the equation that makes sense for me. Most people, they're just not in a position where that, you know, I'm very lucky to be in the position that I can do that. So yeah, but I'm excited for my PS5 Pro. I wish it just came with a disc drive, but I'm very interested to see like what those kinds of upgrades will be. And I'm curious to see what it will be for like games in the future that they're not retrofitting these upgrades on, but for games that are designed where the PS5 Pro entered it sometime in the development stream and they can like maybe take a look at some of those other features. I'm curious to see what will happen with that.
Here's the other question I wanted to ask that is slightly off topic, but it's related, is do you think the disk drive thing is a harbinger of things to come? Do you think the PS6 is a diskless console? And if so, because here's my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree. I think a non-physical media future, even if you don't use physical media for your games, is a very dark future for consoles in the way it isn't for PC. Because whenever you bring this up, people will go like, but PC, you can't buy physical games. And they ignore the fact that on PC you have multiple storefronts. It's a PC, so you can go in and edit the files, you can mod things, all sorts of things. Preservation is much easier on PC, all of those issues, right? Whereas if the PS6 has no disk capacity, and then it is the only way to buy your games is through the PlayStation Store, one, Sony is going to have antitrust lawsuits up the fucking wazoo. If the history of like Apple and Google at the moment is any indication, that will be a problem. But also like it will be more costly to consumers. Preservation will be a much bigger issue. There's like all sorts of knock-on effects that I think honestly make me think Sony would be stupid to do it, because just the legal fees they would save by just putting a fucking disk drive in that thing are pretty big. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that there will be like no option for discs on the PS6. I suspect that the PS6 will do the same thing that they have done with like the PS5 Slim, where they will have a disc drive as like an option, and I suspect they will do the exact same thing where it's like you can, if you had the digital only version, there is like a separate disc drive you can buy, partially because that just seems to simplify the manufacturing process, that you make one console and then after that you bolt on the disc drive for the ones you put in the box that has the disc drive. I strongly suspect that that's what they will do, because the PS5 Pro, I think it's just important to keep in mind that the PS5 Pro is not a flagship console, right? It's an upgrade. Right. So it's like, I think the strategy for what you try to do with the PS5 Pro and what you try to do with the PS6 are fundamentally different. So I would be pretty surprised if they didn't have a disc version, just because one of PlayStation's big strengths as a brand is how international they are. And in America, for lots of sections, for like broad swaths of America, you could get away with a digital-only console in the way that Microsoft can get away with a digital-only thing, because I don't think Microsoft's going to have a disk drive in their next thing. I think Microsoft is running away from discs as fast as they can. But there are lots of international markets where it having a physical option is an absolute necessity for that market. And so I think Sony would be sacrificing a lot of their kind of foreign market potential if they had no version of their console that had a disk drive. And obviously PS5 Pro is very expensive in lots of countries around the world. But again, it is not a console that is their sort of, we got to get people in the door and into our into PSN and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point of the PS5 Pro. I think the point of the PS5 Pro is to target your hardcore users like me who use your PlayStation every day, have enough disposable cash to spend on it, care about having that upgrade. And so that's why you're going to sell it and make money on each PS5 Pro you sell. Whereas I suspect the PS6, they will sell at least a slight cost in order to get it as wide a market as possible. That's at least how it's worked up till now. But who knows? You know, all this shit is changing. You know, who knows what a fucking PS6 is? I have no idea. But that's what.
Well, the other possibility is that there won't be a thing called the PS6 as soon as we think, because the pricing just doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
And the goal is more to keep people on the existing PS5, which still has a lot of headroom for most kinds of games. I think it's easy to forget this. Like, it is the specifically like third-party AAA games that are not as optimized for the system that are having issues. It's not first-party Sony games. It's not indie games. It's not Japanese games. You know, those sorts of things. The general Japanese games, like, you know, Yakuza doesn't have any trouble on the PS5. Right? So yeah, we'll see. The disc thing is just interesting because, like, I do hope, if nothing else, the current antitrust legislation is scaring people away from that, because, like, you know, Apple's having to pay out a lot of legal fees and stuff for having, like, the App Store on iPhone, which would be the similar scenario if you get rid of your disk drive in your system. So that's just something to think about. The other potentiality here is that we're going to have, starting next year, a scenario where Xbox games will run best on the PS5 Pro.
Yes.
because you're going to have the Indiana Jones game, you're going to have anything else they wind up releasing, maybe Starfield at some point, and there won't be a premium Xbox, which means the system they run best on is the PS5 Pro, which does feel like that is the beginning of the end of Xbox as a console brand.
Yeah, I wonder if like we'll have a, eventually an Xbox games showcase where at the bottom is some asterisk that says footage represents the PS5 Pro version of Doom: The Dark Ages or whatever. For their more kind of third party first kind of titles like Doom. That's a whole weird thing. That's a much bigger conversation, I think, for a future podcast when other things become clear of what the fuck Microsoft is doing, because they've been floundering for a long time at this point. But yeah, I look forward to... I probably will not play the Indiana Jones game. Who knows? Maybe if that Indiana Jones game gets great reviews, maybe I'll play that Indiana Jones game on the PS5 Pro. And that.
I actually think that looks... I'm excited for that because it's coming to PlayStation also, and it's the same developers who did the
Wolfenstein.
The Wolfenstein games. It looks cool. But anyway, speaking of cool games, we had a couple of announcements we wanted to talk about. Starting with PlayStation did have a showcase, pretty boring overall, but at the end they did show off the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. It is not called Ghost of Tsushima, which is what I wanted them to call it. It is instead called Ghost of Yōtei, which is actually a better idea to just have it. New protagonist, new area. Let's do this. This is... honestly, I hadn't really thought about, like, what would a Ghost of Tsushima sequel be? Because it's such a complete story. I had no idea what you would do with Jean more or that area. This is the right approach. I'm excited. I also want to see what Sucker Punch can do with the PS5. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a kick-ass trailer. I'm very, very, very excited for this game. I am sad that it's not Ghost of Tsushima, and they just add a second island, which would be the funniest thing in the world, because Shima just means island in Japanese. But this is the right thing. This is the right thing to do. Basically, what it is it's a whole new protagonist. It's like 400-something years in the future. It's set in 1603, which is a very specific year to pick. That's the year that the Tokugawa shogunate becomes a thing. It solidifies in 1603, and Tokugawa Ieyasu takes control basically of political control of Japan. And you are playing a female Ronin looking character. She has a biwa, which is cool. So if you want to, hopefully she gets some sort of crazy super move where she can just send people to a weird interdimensional castle with demons in it by plucking her biwa. But it's just a good look that she has that. That's her string instrument on her back that she's sort of carrying around. And it's really interesting. I kind of was looking up some stuff around the trailer because they did a little blog post after the trailer comes out, as the first party Sony games typically do on their the PlayStation blog or whatever. And this game is set in Hokkaido. Because that's what Yōtei is. Yōtei is the giant mountain that you can see in the trailer that looks cool as shit. That's the coolest looking mountain I've ever seen in a game. Because most games have little tiny mountains that don't look like mountains. Yes. As people, grown up in Colorado, we know what mountains look like, and mountains are fucking huge, and they take up your whole vision, especially if you get close to them. And the mountain just looks so good. And so Yōtei is a huge mountain that it sort of looks like Mount Fuji. It's the same kind of mountain as Mount Fuji. It's it was a volcano once, and it's in this kind of southern section of Hokkaido. So the thing that's really interesting about that setting is that in 1603, Hokkaido was not fully colonized by the people of the mainland of Japan. And so they only the mainland sort of the Yamato people, or whatever you want to call them, the mainland kind of Japanese people, they only really had settled in the southern tip, kind of at the southern edge of Yōtei at that point. So everything north of that is where the Ainu would live, or it would be equivalent to what you would think of as the frontier of the American West, which is clearly what they're kind of invoking in the trailer with this kind of pseudo Ennio Morricone-esque music. There's a whole very kind of spaghetti western kind of vibe to it, which obviously there's a huge amount of shared DNA with that in samurai movies that they're kind of pulling from, which makes a lot of sense and is cool. But it's a really interesting setting to say let's go to the edge of Japanese civilization at that point in history and tell a story there. And it makes me curious to see if they pull in some of the Ainu, who are the indigenous people there, what kind of stories they tell. You don't get obviously a lot from the trailer, but just getting that setting is very thought-provoking and very interesting, and I think it sort of suggests a lot of cool directions they could take. And then you also just get to see there's like a bunch of new weapon types, because in the original game you just use the katana. You see she uses like a matchlock rifle. She uses a like kusarigama, like a ball and chain thing. At one point she's got 2 swords. So it's cool to see they're suggesting how the combat's going to get expanded there. But yeah, the whole vibe and kind of what this implies about the game, I'm so into it. I love Ghost of Tsushima, and this is like, I think, kind of like the most interesting direction they could go in for a sequel. So I'm super stoked for this game.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I loved Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's maybe it's either like that or like Gravity Rush 2 is like my favorite PS4 exclusives that they made. Maybe God of War would be up there, although I think Ragnarok was better, so I'd probably put that on that side. But in any case, it was fantastic. It also, for me, this gives me an excuse. I really want to try to find time to play the director's cut version they made for PS5 of Tsushima, because most of those PS5 upgrades they did of PS4 games I haven't played, because I'd already played the PS4 games and I just haven't had time to go back to them. But that's one where, like, because they added stuff like they corrected the lip flaps on the Japanese actors. Obviously, it runs at 60 FPS now, all of that stuff. So I really want to play that game again, and it was so good. And Sucker Punch is just so good at what they do, and I'm really excited to see what they can do with this system, because unlike a lot of the other developers that Sony has, they haven't sort of been mired in cross-gen or doing a bunch of remasters of their games. Yeah. They've been working on this, and it will be a true PS5 exclusive, so I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, and you never played the DLC for Tsushima, did you?
I don't think I did. Was there a story DLC, or was it just the multiplayer thing?
Because when they put out the director's cut, they added in a whole like DLC. I mean, it is kind of a Tsushima, because there's like you gotta go to another smaller island. There's like another mini open world area. Yeah, I mean, it was like really early PS5 that came out, and I played that, and that has, obviously, I didn't go back and play the base game stuff, but obviously that had all the same upgrades, because you just played the DLC in the upgraded version of the game, and the upgrades were very nice. So yeah, like I'm kind of of the same thought. I'll probably go and replay the original as well, before Yōtei comes out, even if obviously there's no like narrative reason. I'm sure there'll be some sort of vague reference to, the ghost of Tsushima from 400 years ago, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that will happen at some point, if nothing else other than in like a cool side mission. But I just kind of want to replay that game, and it's just a good excuse to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, even better news, we're getting a new Yakuza game, and we're getting a weird Yakuza game. Do you want to tell us about Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii?
Yes, I would like to talk about Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. Yeah, so TGS happened. There were like a bunch of new game announcements for most stuff in TGS. It was a lot of like, here's another trailer for Dynasty Warrior Origins, which looks sick. Here's another trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds, which looks sick. But then there was a cool, Ruga Gotoku Studios, or the Yakuza studio. They do their own fucking thing. They had the whole giant stage show, which they kind of always do every year to announce their big new game and have all like the cast members come out. And they debuted Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, which is, in Japanese, it is Yuga Gotoku Gaiden. So it's meant to follow in The Man Who Erased His Name. Like they're marketing it as like that, but for Yakuza 8 / Like Dragon Infinite Wealth. And here, instead of it being a Kiryu side story, it is a Majima Goro side story. And so Majima seemingly washes up in Hawaii, likely with most of his clothes on. So he sort of, he gets away with it a little bit better than Ichiban did in his own game. He seems to have like temporary amnesia. Like there's a part in the trailer early on where it seems like he doesn't remember things, but then later in the trailer, I'm going to guess that probably is a thing that gets resolved very quickly based on what I saw in the trailer. But yeah, he gets wrapped up in a whole like pirate conspiracy, and it's in the most Yakuza way possible, where like it both seems like it's modern day pirates, but then there's a bunch of like, golden age of Pirates of the Caribbean type shit, like tricorn hats and cutlasses, and he's piloting a like fucking Spanish galleon looking ship and all that kind of stuff, but there are also people on speedboats. So it seems absolutely fucking insane. Even by Yakuza standards, it seems pretty fucking crazy. Because usually that kind of stuff is more on the edges or in like the side content where it goes truly bizarre, like where you run a whole Animal Crossing island in Dondoku Island and there are pirates on that island that want to make the island full of trash you have to fight, right? But that's the side thing. That's not the main storyline of Yakuza 8. So it's cool to see them going like, hey, if Majima's at the heart of this thing, Majima's world is a crazy one and crazy shit happens, and he's got an eye patch. So, how have we not done a pirate story with Majima yet? He's basically a pirate anyways. And yeah, they basically kind of showed a trailer and did like a little bit of kind of talking about the game. It looks super cool. You get some like, pirate combat styles with Majima. That seems like they're pulling in some of the goofy kind of stuff they did in Man Who Erased His Name with the spy gadgets, but it's like pirate tools or whatever instead. So you get, he straight up has the same grappling hook thing. It's just a grappling hook instead of a spy watch thingy. So it's like an old-timey pirate grappling hook, and he's got cutlasses, and he's got fucking like flintlock pistols and all that kind of nonsense. One thing that I thought was very funny, and I hope this is a thing they continue to do for all the Gaiden games, and I hope they keep on making these because the first one was cool, this one looks awesome, is First Summer Uika, who was the like singer who did the voice acting for Akame, the character in Sotenbori in the Gaiden game, who's like sort of your like contact with the homeless and all that kind of stuff. She's a major character in that story. That actress is also in this game, but she plays the little kid that you see that like kind of helps Majima and seems like is one of the main characters of the story. So you couldn't possibly tell it's the same actress, but they obviously was in the big stage presentation that I watched. And I love the idea of just like every time they do a Gaiden game, they should bring her back and she just plays a different character, because she was really good as Akame. Who was also just modeled after her. I'm sure she'll be very good as a little kid. And I like the idea of this weird running joke if we just cast this like 20-something Japanese singer just to play different people every time we do a weird random Gaiden game, whether it's a spy thing, whether it's a pirate thing, or I don't know, you'll be a fucking cowboy next time. Who knows where they go from here.
It's so good. I love it. Because they used to do more weird stuff like this, right? Didn't they have, like, the zombie one? I know They obviously had the Ishin games. So, like, doing a pirate thing, although this is even weirder because it's just in the main continuity from what we can tell, right?
Yes. It's clearly set after Yakuza 8. Like, there's stuff in the trailer that discusses some of the events of Yakuza 8 with, like, the nuclear waste and all that stuff. And Polycana, which is the religious cult from 8 and all that. And so, yes, it is in the mainline continuity. It is set after Yakuza 8. It will be the furthest point in the timeline until they make a 9th game. So, it's pretty wild.
It's awesome. Obviously, like, I haven't played as much of the Yakuza games as you have, Sean, but I love every second I've played of them. I love anything pirate-related, and I love pirate video games. This sounds like a dream come true. For those wondering, I still have not finished Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I very much want to. I played, like, 70-some hours of it, and I got interrupted when I moved from Iowa to Colorado. I'll get back to it. It was phenomenal. It's, like, one of my 1 or 2, favorite games of the year so far. So, obviously, any more stuff in Hawaii, especially if it's pirate-related, I am there for it. This is one of my most anticipated games of 2025.
Absolutely. And it was just one of the things, I think I talked about it when I talked about Yakuza 8 on the weekly stuff, was one of the things that was most exciting about that game is they made this crazy giant fucking Hawaii map, which is huge, particularly by their standards, and has all this cool stuff. And as soon as you saw that, they're like, well, they're going to make like 3 or 4 games that use this Hawaii map because they're smart. And they're not idiots like everybody else who makes video games that just destroy everything they've made every time they make a new video game and start from scratch. They're like, no, we made a giant Hawaii map. We spent a lot of time in research. We sent everybody on Hawaii, not just on a vacation, but also to just go, make this cool map. And so, yes, everybody and their uncle is somehow going to end up in fucking Hawaii in the exact same way that everybody and their uncle somehow ended up in Yokohama. When they made, like, Lost Judgment was in Yokohama, and then they used the Yokohama map in the Gaiden game and stuff like that. We're going to make this big map. We're going to wring every facet out of this map for several years. And it will be a recurring location. I'm sure in Yakuza 9, they will find some way to get fucking Ichiban to go back to Hawaii. Even if it's not the main point of the story, there'll be like one chapter where he's like, fuck it, I'm in Hawaii, in the same way that they sent him to Sotenbori in Yakuza 7 because they made Sotenbori in the Dragon Engine in KyoAni 2. So it's like, we made this Osaka area, fuck it. He's going to go to Osaka for one chapter. It's not an important thing, but he's got to go there. And you've got to walk around and see the big crab and do all that shit, and here we go.
And this is why RGG studios are smarter than basically everyone else in the industry. Yes. But there we go. All right, last thing in the news today, Sean, is Kyoto Animation, our beloved KyoAni, who we did a whole fucking season on. Saying we did a season seems like we're selling it short. We did 30-some episodes. It was crazy.
Spent a year of our life on.
Yeah, we spent a year of our life on our KyoAni season of Japan Animation Station. They have announced 2 new projects for 2025, and they are both so fucking exciting. We are getting Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, A Lonely Dragon Wants to Be Loved, which is a movie sequel to the Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon series that will be directed by the one, the only, the legend, Tatsuya Ishihara. But that's not all, folks. Yeah. We are also getting their first new TV series, their first non-sequel TV series in many years, City, the Animation, which is kind of a sequel because it's based on the manga by Nichijou author Keiichi Arawi, and it is directed by Taichi Ishidate, the co-director of Nichijou. Sean, we're basically getting Nichijou Season 2. How excited are you?
Yeah, this was awesome. This was more than I was expecting them to announce, because they had a little, trailer thing that they announced these on, YouTube, and it was voiced by Ono Daisuke, if you watch the actual thing, which is, always nice to have him here. So we've got this movie and this show. The movie was hugely surprising to me as an announcement, just because I kind of assumed that the Maid Dragon stuff was done after S. Obviously, the manga has still kept on going and has been popular. But, it's just enough time had passed since Maid Dragon S that I sort of just assumed, they're probably kind of putting that to bed and moving on. But obviously, Ishihara finished Sound Euphonium 3, one of the best things KyoAni has ever done, which we both agree on. And so he's freed up to do this movie. It's cool because it's cool because it's a Kana focused movie. So if you see the trailer, or it's not really a trailer, it's like a poster, and they did a little animated video showing off the poster with the tagline, which is "Bye Bye Koyashi-san," which is a very sad tagline for a movie. But it's all focused on Kana, who's my favorite character in that show. So I'm very excited to see what becomes of that. But City, the animation, that is even more exciting. One, it's just, this is the first thing Ishidate has directed since Violet Evergarden, the movie. And so it's just nice to have him back in the main seat. He's obviously done episodes for their various shows, but he has not done his own series since then, since Violet Evergarden. And it has been funny seeing all the reporting of the show being like, and it's the director of Violet Evergarden and Beyond the Boundary is making City Animation. It's like, that's obviously true, but partially, I think, because nobody knows how to fucking credit that series Inshutsu credit, which we talked about at length at Japan Animation Station, on any of the English websites. I don't think anybody knows what he did on that show, and that he was more or less the co-director of Nichijou. And so that's the real tagline here for his role in the production, is that he was one of the defining creative figures of Nichijou. So it's not just that they're going back to that same mangaka, and doing City the Animation, but it is one of the main figures specifically in Nichijou that worked with Kyoto Animation. That's that kind of tag team there. And it's fascinating to me because City the Animation is done, or sorry, not City the Animation, City the manga is done. So that finished serialization a couple years ago. So it's interesting to me that they're kind of going back and doing an adaptation there, which is a thing that most animation studios would not do.
I wonder if they had a plan around the time of the fire and some of the fallout of that, and it just got moved a couple of years, which happened to several things they did,
yes,
like Sound Euphonium 3.
Yeah, so that's entirely possible, but it's very interesting just because I think it's because it's KyoAni that they could do that. I just feel like any other animation studio, if that is the reason why, if it was a thing that was planned to be done earlier and then the fire interrupted it, I feel like any other animation studio would then walk away from that project because part of the economic impetus for it has been lessened. But I'm very excited that they're doing it. And I'm torn between the desire of wanting to read that manga because it sounds really good, and when I've seen impressions online after this, everyone's been saying, the manga is even better than Nichijou was as a manga. So I really want to read the manga, but I also want to be fresh and kind of just see the anime without any preconceived notions. So I've been struggling with that since the announcement.
Here's the answer, Sean. Just go watch Nichijou again.
For the fifth or sixth time at this point. Yeah. Okay, I've watched Nichijou a lot, and it's always good. One of the best things to see the animation is on the video voiced by Ono Daisuke, where they announced all this stuff. There was this absolutely fucking bonkers looping animation that Arai Keiichi, the mangaka, drew. And that was just like was one of the characters, and like it was intentionally like a broken animation, and they showed that, and that was his like message that these people always write of like, oh, the message to the fans with this announcement, and it was just like insane gif. And then they showed one that it was Ishidate's, and he did the same thing, but he had this whole hand drawn message written in hand by hand, but around the edges were drawings that were animated, drawn by Ishidate Taichi. It was fucking cool as shit. So people haven't seen those. I'd recommend just going, and if you go near the end of their announcement video, you can see those. There's like not much to those announcements. It's just a poster, but those were cool to see, and it just kind of makes you very confident in the energy is there from Nichijou here as well. So
yeah,
momentous announcements, and I'm sure we will find an excuse to take a maybe a truly briefer vacation in Kyoto Animation or Kyoto, but I think we'll be there for these as well.